okay, so fertility rates are dropping. What's the big deal, right? What's the big deal? Well, as I get into this a little bit more, you'll understand that there's a huge concern. And now I'm talking about globally from governments around the world that are concerned with the drops in the fertility rates. Because again, this is a global issue. People's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it's greatly appreciated. As always, thank you to everyone who has listened to the podcast and continues to listen to the podcast. Your support is greatly appreciated. Also, thank you and welcome to those who are listening to the podcast for the first time. We appreciate you taking some time out of your day to listen to the podcast. If this information is beneficial and you find this information enlightening, please feel free to share the information with your network, family, community, and friends. And also, please, you can also subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll be notified when each episode drops. We put out a new episode every Friday. And then for those of you who enjoy watching the podcast on YouTube, or if you would like to watch the podcast on YouTube, we put out a new video every Friday at 3 p.m. And you can also see me live. Well, not live, but recorded on on YouTube. And that video's out every Friday at 3 p.m. But to all, thank you. And we appreciate the support. So today I want to talk about the fertility rate. That is the rate, birth rate, fertility rate, children rate, however you want to describe it. But today I want to talk about the fertility rate because I don't know how many people know this. And if you know, this will be reinforcement. And if you don't know, this will be eye-opening. But birth rates around the world have continued to decline. And birth rates, basically, layman's terms of just the amount of children being born per year, has continued to decline, and the declines have been around the world. So this is not, specific to one country. Of course, today I'm going to talk a lot about, the fertility rate here in the U.S. and its decline in comparison to a lot of places in the world. But again, this is a phenomenon that is occurring in every country in the world, big or small. So, the fertility rate. Why am I talking about this, right? Because it's like, well, why are you talking about the fertility rate? Well, there are a lot of reasons, number one, for its decline. Number two, a lot of reasons or a lot of ways that it affects all of us in some way. And then, I also want to talk about some of the, arguments for its decline and some of the other arguments that have come up, especially here in the United States, in regards to abortion and immigration, because it's interesting as I was looking into this, doing the research for the podcast regarding this topic, it really put a light bulb on in terms of some of the arguments that I hear on both sides. And when I say both sides, I'm saying from a political standpoint about, for abortion, against abortion, for immigration, against immigration. So I'm going to touch on that as well as I discuss this. But today I wanted to talk about fertility rates and the decline of fertility rates, right? So I guess I'll start here in the United States. Let's just start here in the United States, right? So over the last 50 years, there has been a steady decline in fertility rates birth rates here in the United States. And I'm looking at a graph that was done by the National. Who was this done by? By the National Vital Statistic Reports, and it actually was posted on theconversation.com. But they have a graph here that shows the decline of the birth rates here in the United States. So, and it basically goes from 1970 up until pretty much today. So, back in 1970, and interestingly enough, just as a kind of a pin, in 1970, a lot of this conversation was also being talked about because in that generation in the 70s, they saw a sharp decline in birth rates compared to the previous 50 years and 30 years prior to this, because the 1970s was considered at that time the birth bust years, is what they called it, because they saw such a decline. But going back, so the graph that I'm looking at shows the trends in terms of birth rates since the 1970s. And in 1970, on average, it was expected that women, obviously because women bear children, that per woman, it would be about 2.6 children per woman. Now, obviously, I'm saying 2.6 because they're using statistical data, but you get my understanding. So basically, every woman or every family was expected to have between 2.5 children per family or per woman. That was back in 1970. As of today, the fertility rate here in the United States is now at 1.6 children per woman, or 1.6 births per woman in the United States. Wow, right? I know, and that's a huge, now in terms of statistical data, that's a huge drop, right? From 2.6 basically down to 1.6. That's a one point drop. That's a huge drop. That's basically the equivalent of, I don't have to say, but obviously half, right? It's a 50% drop. But anyway, so why is this happening, right? First of all, before I get into the why, okay, so fertility rates are dropping. What's the big deal, right? What's the big deal? Well, as I get into this a little bit more, you'll understand that there's a huge, huge concern. And now I'm talking about globally, from governments around the world that are concerned with the drops in the fertility rates. Because again, this is a global issue, not just, here in the United States. But I'm going to talk about that in a little bit in terms of, why that's such an issue and what the concern is. So now I just gave you the rates for here in the United States, but let's talk a little bit about from where does the United States compare to other countries, right? Because again, like I said, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just situated here in the United States. Well, I'm looking at some information here from that was provided by the World Bank. And they kind of did a list of the top 10 countries that have the highest fertility rates. And then they did another top 10 of countries that have some of the lowest fertility rates per woman, or, lowest fertility rates, per woman or per family around the world. So I just told you here in the United States, here in the United States, current date, it's around 1.6 children per, or 1.6 births per woman, right? Let me start first with the countries that have the highest fertility rates. So the countries that have the highest fertility rates, and a lot of these countries are countries on the continent of Africa. You have Niger, you also have Somalia, you have Congo, the Congo, you have Angola and things in Nigeria, Gambia. In Niger, for instance, the fertility rate is 6.8 births per woman. Okay, 6.8 births per woman. Now here, obviously, again in the United States, it's 1.6 births per woman. So now you can see the differentiation there, right? Um, and then again, like I said, you have Congo is at 5.8, you have Angola at 5.4, Nigeria at 5.3. So in those countries, in those African countries, you have birth rates that are well above 5 and 6 children per woman in those countries. Now, some of the countries that have some of the lowest fertility rates or birth rates around the world. Again, I'm getting this from, this is World Bank data. I'm getting this from World Population Review, which posted the World Bank's data on their site. Some of the countries that have some of the lowest fertility rates, you have South Korea. Japan actually just took over as number one because they now have some of the lowest fertility rates in the world. So you have South Korea at 0.9, so less than one child per birth, or one birth per woman in South Korea, 0.9. You also have Japan, like I said, at 0.8. You have Puerto Rico at one birth per woman. And then the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So I kind of wanted to give a perspective, right, between what's here in the United States and then what is currently going on in other parts of the world. Now, a lot of the reasons behind the decline in the fertility rates are very interesting as well. But again, why is this a concern, right? So, because again, when I started reading it, I'm like, well, it's probably this, probably that. But this is a huge concern for governments around the world. So I wanted to find out, why is this such a concern? And interestingly enough, there was an interview on Bloomberg TV a few months ago where Melissa Kearney, who is the director for the Aspen Economic Strategy Group, and she's also a professor at the University of Maryland, she was interviewed about this, and she actually talked about this, and listen to what she says about some of the potential ramifications or the concerns that many countries have about the low fertility rate in their countries.
Of economic growth, because we have to depend upon future economic growth. What is that decline in fertility likely to do to us?
The decline in birth rates has meant a decline in population growth. And the most immediate effect of this is likely to be a shrinking size of the working age population. So the working age population in the US has been stagnant for over a decade now. And given the decrease in birth rates we've been experiencing for the past 15 years, in the not too distant future, again, absent an increase in immigration, we're simply going to have fewer people of working age. Now that's consequential both in a fiscal sense, meaning that's going to put fiscal pressures on our social security system, funding for Medicare, disability insurance, but it also poses economic headwinds in the sense that you have fewer people of working age, and that doesn't necessarily just mean fewer people to produce stuff, lower economic activity overall. More worryingly, it could mean lower GDP per capita, or a reduction in productivity per person, a reduction in living standards.
And that is basically an economic term or economic way, when she says GDP, basically to say that they're concerned, and these are governments around the world, that less people, right, smaller populations means that not only are there less resources for labor from a labor force standpoint, but also there are less individuals to produce goods, to sell goods, and to buy goods. And that has a huge and profound effect on any country around the world. As I talked about in the previous podcast when I was talking about taxes, one of the largest revenue generating sources for any government, especially modern governments, is tax revenue, right? So basically, what she's saying, long short, is that as these declines continue, the concern is how are we going to be able to replace these revenue, this revenue, right? How are we going to be able to keep our standards of living high if we don't have enough population to produce, sell, and buy these goods? So that's the concern for many countries around the world when it comes to the reduction in fertility and birth rates. That's a major concern. Okay, so why is this occurring, right? So we talked about some of the concerns, right? So why is this occurring? Why are fertility rates declining around the world? Well, there is no one reason why. And when I did this research, I checked, several sources, and as I always do, I always encourage you guys to do the research as well, right? I'm just a guy with a mic, so please do the research, and you can also, look at this information as well. And as you know, I'll post this information on the links for my video. But as I was doing the research, there are multiple reasons why the birth rate is declining. So let me get into that a little bit, and then, we'll go from there. So, some of the reasons may be pretty obvious, right? I don't necessarily have to refer to the article. One of the main reasons why, one of the reasons, not the main reason, but one reason why birth rates are declining is because there is more accessibility to contraceptives, right? They literally are more, not only accessibility, but more options for contraceptives, right? So you have condoms, you have birth control pills, now you have the morning after pill. As you know, here in the United States, now they're getting ready to introduce, or maybe they have already, the abortion pill. So you have different avenues now, right, for either not having children or at least putting off having children, right? So that's one reason, right? You have a tremendous amount of contraceptive options and accessibility. That's number one. Another reason why birth rates and fertility rates have continued to decline is because of the number of what they call unexpected births, or unexpected births, or unexpected pregnancies. There has been a huge decline. Some reports say it's almost been like 22% over the last 50 years in terms of pregnancies that are more people are now looking to plan pregnancies as opposed to, oops, we had a good time and now there's a child on the way. So there's been a huge decline in unexpected births and unexpected pregnancies, which has also contributed to the decline in the birth rates here in the United States and around the world. Again, I'm talking not just the United States, around the world. In addition, education plays a huge role as well, right? Because education, not just book education, right? I'm not just talking about formal education or higher learning education, because that plays a role as well, and I'll talk about that. But just education about sex education, and also just education and understanding about the parenting and birthing and pregnancy process, right? People have greater understanding. Obviously, there's tons of access in terms of getting that information. So people are now being able to have a understanding of the of what procreation is, right? And what is in terms of producing a child, right? What goes into that. And that information and that education has really also contributed as well to the decline in the birthing rates. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying that it's just one issue. All of these combined are the reasons why you see the fertility rate declining. Education, as I also mentioned, it's mentioned here, and I'm reading an article. Where is this from? This is from the Population Reference Bureau, and they did an article on this, and they talked about education and income as well. And here it says education and income plays a significant role in fertility because nearly every contemporary society, people who are more educated and have higher incomes have fewer children than those who are less educated and have lower incomes. So, and I talked about this in another podcast. If you want to check it, when I talked about education and the income variations, but those who have higher education, who have access to higher education, or who obtain higher education degrees, typically make more money and also typically have fewer children compared to those who have lower incomes. This has also played a huge role in the fertility rate declining because around the world, again, and especially here in the United States, women in particular, and I'm specifically talking about women because they are the ones who bear children, education in terms of population, women are outpacing men when it comes to education in terms of higher education. And that's a whole nother subject when I get into that in terms of racial disparities. But education and income also play a huge role in why the fertility rates continue to decline. It also goes on to say here that basically in 2017, and I'm reading again this article from the Population Reference Bureau, prb.org. It says in 2017, U.S. women ages 25 and older with an advanced degree had an average of 1.8 children compared to 2.25 children with women that just had a high school diploma, and 2.7 with women that had no high school diploma. So education also plays a huge role in that. Income, as I said, also plays a huge role in that, because when societies feel more comfortable about their economic outlook, and this is, again, across the board, then they're more comfortable with reproducing and bringing a child into the world, feeling that they have the ability to support the child and supports the child's needs. So income also plays a huge role in that. In terms of the other reasons, there are some other reasons. A lot of it has to do culturally. There are cultural aspects of it why people have chosen to not have children. Also, as I mentioned, in terms of the economic standpoint, because many younger children, many younger people, younger adults, I'm going to say children, younger adults, especially those who are going to school or coming out of school with so much student debt and other debt, they're delaying having children. And sometimes that delay goes beyond childbearing years for women. And then you start getting into you start getting into other, I was going to say, I don't want to say it because I'm going to say it wrong, but when you start doing artificial insemination and things of that nature in order to have children. But pushing children off till later on because of economic pressures also plays a huge role in that. Matter of fact, I was reading another article somewhere where it said that, the average age of women bearing their first child, at least here in the United States, is now closer to 30 years old. And, 50 years ago, it was between 20, 24, 24, 26, somewhere in that range. So it plays a huge role. But I was also going to say, in terms of culturally, a lot of that has influenced religious beliefs and religious followings also plays a role in that. It has a lot to also do with the decline of individuals who are participating in organized religion, because a lot of those teachings talk about procreation and things of that nature. And there's been a steady decline in all religions of people at least acknowledging that they are part of organized religion. So I just gave you a ton of things, a ton of reasons why the fertility rate is falling. But I wanted to kind of cover that so you can have an understanding why that is happening and some of the reasons behind it, right? So, talked about the fertility rate falling, talked about some of the concerns from governments about it falling, and talked about some of the reasons why it's falling. Now, what's being done about it? Because again, I know somebody might say, well, what you mean? What is being done about it? Like, you can't force people to have children. Of course, you can't force people to have children, but there is a push to encourage people to have more children. Why is this? Because, as I stated earlier, this is a huge economic generator for a country. I know you look at your babies and you go, oh, that's my baby. No, people looking at children as economic advancement for not only themselves, but also for governments, right? So around the world, you have governments that are trying to implement different programs to try to increase fertility. And matter of fact, let me play another piece from this interview from Melissa Kearney, who's with the Aspen Economic Strategy Group. Again, she did an interview on Bloomberg television, and she talked about this as well, about what are some countries doing to try to increase fertility rates around the country. Around the world. It's really interesting stuff.
Here's where I think we can draw lessons from other high-income countries, Japan, UK, Canada, other countries in Europe, including Scandinavian countries, that have been dealing with below replacement level fertility for many decades. The first thing I would note is that despite efforts to turn things around, fertility has remained below replacement level in those countries for many decades. A lot of those places have implemented explicitly pro-natalist policies, things like baby bonuses or child tax credits, expanded parental leave, expanded subsidies for childcare, all things that should make the cost of having children lower, or the ability to combine work and kids easier. And yet the evidence from those kinds of incremental policies is that they might lead to some modest increase in birth rates in the short run in particular, perhaps not persistently, but nothing of the size that we would need to really lead to a dramatic reversal of the decline in fertility or the stubbornly low fertility rates.
And, and she said a lot there. I know if you're listening, that I know I did the same thing. I was like, wow. Now you hear a lot of those programs that she ran off, right? Extra maternity leave, child tax credits, baby bonuses, other work, work from home, things of that nature. Sounds familiar, right? Especially for those of us here in the United States. Okay. These are some of the programs that are being implemented around the world because they want to make sure that the fertility rate continues to increase because, and I've said this is probably the third time, the greatest revenue source for a country is its people, okay? Is its people. Now, there is a number that each country would like to hit in terms of fertility rates. And this is called the fertility rates. This is called the replacement fertility rate, right? Or the replacement population rate. And this is not a conspiracy. I'm not talking conspiracy. I don't do conspiracy stuff. This is an actual number that countries around the world focus on. And basically the replacement population rate is the rate that you can replace the population. I don't know how more simpler I can make it. So for every person, right, if you're in a marriage, or not even a marriage, I don't know why I keep saying marriage. If you're in a relationship, the replacement rate basically says that you two people create another two people. And that's the number that countries want to stay at, or even higher, right? So they want to stay within 2.1 children or births per woman. That's where they want to stay at. And this is a real number. This is not, again, I don't do conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And as always, I encourage you, you can look this up as well. So, but getting back, those programs that you heard are some of the things that countries are doing to try to, air quote, encourage fertility increases or encourage birth or childbearing, so they can continue to sustain as a society, because it's a huge, it's much bigger than I just want to have a baby, right? Because there are governments, businesses looking at your baby as a contributing member and also as an investment to continue to grow their economic endeavors. So, always be clear about that. But that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to kind of talk about the fertility rate. I just, I came across a news story and I'm like, wow, I want to, learn a little bit more about that. And this stuff blows me away. I don't know if it does for y'all, but for me, it's like, whoa, okay. But yeah, definitely check it out. I'll post this, information, all of the links, as you know, to anything that I cover. That's usually posted on my YouTube. So when we post a video, those links will be in that as well, and I'll post them on my LinkedIn as well. That's another thing. I'm on LinkedIn, y'all, and I haven't said that, and I don't know why I haven't been saying that. Follow me on LinkedIn, Trey Evans, TreyEvans, Trey Evans. I'm on LinkedIn, so follow me there as well, and I'm going to start posting that because I haven't been posting that. But as always, if this information has been enlightening and you want to leave a comment, feel free to also follow me on any of the social media platforms. You can follow me at I am Trey Evans, and that's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In addition, you can also follow us at the show podcast, which is the People's Voice Podcast, the People's Voice Podcast. But again, I hope this information was enlightening and you want to share it. And, we appreciate your time today. So as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.
I am Trey Evans, the People's Voice.